She thought he was dead. He thought she had forgotten. But the baby with his steely blue eyes shattered all those lies in a single second. Lena Hartwell had kept this secret for 5 years, not out of selfishness, but out of fear. Dante Morelli had disappeared without explanation, not out of cowardice, but out of love. And now, as fate thrust them into the same room, they both realize the biggest secret isn't the child, but the one who knew about the child all along. Press like, and comment the name of the city you're watching to let me know how far my story has progressed. Don't miss out. This journey has only just begun. The snow came down hard that Tuesday night, the kind that didn't drift or float but fell straight and mean, like the city itself was trying to drive people indoors. Manhattan wore it badly. The sidewalks outside Carmine's on West 46th had gone gray-brown with slush, and the wind off 9th Avenue cut through every gap in every coat and made people walk faster and talk less and tip worse. Lena Hartwell had been on her feet for 9 hours. She moved between tables with the efficiency of someone who had stopped thinking about efficiency years ago, who had simply absorbed the rhythm of the place into her body the way a soldier absorbs the weight of a rifle. Pad in her apron pocket, pen behind her ear, smile that said, "I'm happy to help you," and eyes that said, "Please just tell me what you want." The restaurant was 3/4 full despite the storm. Carmine's wasn't the kind of place that emptied out in bad weather. It was the kind of place people came to specifically because the weather was bad, because the red sauce was thick and the bread came out hot, and the candles on the tables made everyone look a little more forgiving of each other. It smelled like garlic and wood smoke and the faint chemical bite of the cleaning solution Marco used on the floors every morning. Marco was in the kitchen screaming at someone about the veal. Lena blocked it out. She had a 4-top in the back corner, a couple celebrating something. The woman kept touching the diamond on her finger. And a 2-top by the window who'd been nursing the same bottle of wine for 40 minutes, and a family of 6 near the front who had 2 kids under 10 and were therefore her lowest tipping table of the night by statistical certainty. She'd learned that early. Kids meant chaos meant the parents were too exhausted to do math at the end. She refilled water glasses without being asked. She cleared a plate before the man had fully set down his fork. She moved the way women move when they've been doing thankless work long enough to make it look effortless, which is the cruelest trick exhaustion ever taught her. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She already knew who it was. She didn't look at it. Mrs. Calloway, who watched Noah on Tuesday and Thursday nights, had already texted twice. "He won't eat his dinner." Then, "He says he wants to wait for you." Lena had written back the same thing she always wrote back. "Give him the pasta. Tell him I'll be home by 10. I love him." The responses were so automatic they barely required thought anymore. They just required the particular kind of heartache you learned to carry quietly, in the pocket behind your sternum, where it didn't show on your face. Noah was 6. He'd be 7 in April. She did not let herself think about that right now. The front door opened and a gust of cold came in with it, and 2 of the candles along the near wall guttered and nearly went out. Lena glanced up from the 2-top she was attending to and registered a man in a long coat stomping snow off his boots, and she looked back down at the bill she was running and thought nothing of it. Then the door opened again. 3 men this time. Big. The kind of big that wasn't about height necessarily, but about the way they took up space, the way their coats fell differently because of what was underneath them. They stood just inside the threshold and looked at the room with the flat, systematic attention of men whose job it was to look at rooms. The couple at the 4-top stopped talking. The family of 6 went quieter than a family of 6 with 2 children under 10 had any right to go. Lena straightened. Something old and instinctive moved through her chest, something that lived below language. Then the door opened a 3rd time. He came in without hurry. He never had. That was the thing she'd forgotten, or tried to forget, or told herself she'd forgotten. The absolute unhurried certainty with which Dante Morelli moved through the world, as though time itself had learned not to press him. He was in a dark suit under a charcoal overcoat, no tie, collar open 1 button at the throat. He was 34 now. The years had done something to his face that wasn't aging exactly. It was more like refinement, like a blade that had been used and resharpened until the edge was thinner and more final than it had started. He looked the same. He looked nothing like what she remembered. Lena's hand went still on the water pitcher. The couple at the 4-top were staring. Marco had stopped screaming in the kitchen. The whole restaurant had that particular quality of silence that happens when a room full of strangers all receive the same wordless information at the same time and don't know what to do with it. She thought, "Don't look at him." She looked at him. He was scanning the room. His eyes moved with that same methodical patience, table to table, face to face, and she watched the moment they found her. The tiny, almost imperceptible pause, a fraction of a second where everything in his expression went very still. And then something shifted behind his eyes, and he didn't look away. Neither did she, for 3 full seconds that felt like she was underwater. Then from the back hallway where the restrooms were, there was the sound of small sneakers on tile, and Lena's stomach dropped out of her body entirely. Noah had not waited at Mrs. Calloway's. He'd decided to visit Mom at work. He'd done it once before in September, convinced Mrs. Calloway that Lena knew about it, walked the 4 blocks in his puffy orange coat with his backpack still on his shoulders, and presented himself at the service entrance with the confidence of someone who had not yet learned to be afraid of the world. Marco had given him a Shirley Temple and called Lena, and she'd been so furious and so helpless in the face of his absolute unrepentant grin that she'd had to walk to the alley to pull herself together. He came through the dining room at a full run, the way he moved everywhere. Like stillness was something that happened to other people. Sneakers squeaking on the hardwood, backpack bouncing, and he was looking back over his shoulder at something he'd left behind, some imagined adventure, some game playing out only in his head. And he didn't see the man standing at the front of the room until he'd already crashed full speed into his leg. The impact stopped Noah cold. He stumbled back, nearly sat down on the floor, caught himself with both hands slapping the hardwood, and looked up with that 6-year-old's bewildered indignation, the expression that preceded either tears or outrage, depending on the day. One of the bodyguards moved. Dante held up a hand and the man stopped. He crouched down, slowly, with that same unhurried certainty, his overcoat pooling around him on the floor, and he looked at the boy who had run into him, and he said something low that Lena couldn't hear from across the room. Noah said something back. He was already recovering. He was always recovering fast. It was one of his things, the resilience that sometimes made her want to weep. And he wiped his palms on his jeans and looked at this large man crouching in front of him with the frank and unself-conscious curiosity of a child who hadn't yet learned to be intimidated. And Dante went still. Not the careful stillness of a man controlling his reactions. Something different, something that broke through the surface of his composure the way ice breaks when the weight finally exceeds what the structure can hold. He went still in the way of a man who has just seen something that reorganizes the entire architecture of what he thought was true. Lena was already moving. She was crossing the dining room with the water pitcher still in her hand, navigating between tables without looking at them, because every cell in her body was oriented toward that spot on the floor where her son was looking up at Dante Morelli, with the complete open trust of a child who had not yet been taught to distrust the world. Those eyes. She knew what Dante was seeing. She had known it since the day Noah was born, since the first moment the nurse laid him across her chest, and she looked down at his face and saw those eyes looking back at her. Not her eyes, which were brown and unremarkable, but his eyes, steel blue and specific, the particular shade that didn't occur in her family anywhere, not in any photo, not in any memory. She had told herself it didn't matter. She had told herself it was just a color. She had told herself a lot of things in 5 years that she no longer believed. Noah. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that. Come here. Noah looked up at her with mild surprise. Not alarmed, not concerned, just, "Oh, Mom, you're right there." He stood and came to her, and she put her hand on his shoulder and felt him lean slightly into her the way he did when he was tired or overwhelmed, that unconscious animal warmth of a child seeking the body he trusted most. Dante stood. He was 6 feet away. His eyes moved from Noah's face to hers, and the question in them was not a question anymore. It was an answer. It was an answer looking for confirmation, and she could see in the set of his jaw and the way his hands had gone absolutely still at his sides that he had already done the math, already read the evidence, already reached the conclusion that she had spent 5 years building walls against. Lena, yeah, he said, just her name, nothing else. She hadn't heard him say it in 5 years. She had worked hard not to imagine what it would sound like. She had not worked hard enough. We're closed, she said. One of the bodyguards actually started to speak. Dante silenced him without looking. "Walk away," she said. Her voice was lower now. Noah was right there. She could feel him against her hip, his attention drifting already toward the kitchen where Marco was visible through the pass-through, which meant Noah was about to ask about the Shirley Temple. And she needed this conversation to not happen. Needed it the way she needed air, with the same urgency and the same certainty that it was already too late. "Whatever you came here for, walk away." "I came here because there's a storm, and I was hungry." He said it without any particular inflection, and she understood it was both true and completely beside the point. "I didn't know you worked here." "Now you do." "Now I do." His eyes went to Noah again. She watched it happen, the way his gaze moved against what seemed like his own will, pulled by gravity or something more fundamental than gravity. "How old is he?" It wasn't a question. "Dante, how old?" Noah had looked up at the sound of his mother's voice going tight. He was a perceptive kid, always had been, always listening for the frequencies below the words, the way children do when they've grown up in households where the subtext mattered more than the text. He looked at Dante with renewed attention, this time less casual, more careful. 6, Noah said, answering for himself because that was also one of his things. "I'll be 7 in April. Who are you?" The silence that followed lasted approximately 4 seconds. They were the longest 4 seconds of Lena's life, and her life had contained some long seconds. Dante looked at her son. Her son looked back at him with those eyes. His eyes. The eyes Lena had loved and mourned and tried to convince herself she'd forgotten. And the restaurant held its collective breath around them. "A friend of your mother's," Dante said finally. "From a long time ago." Noah considered this with the gravity of someone for whom all information about his mother's life was significant. Then he nodded, apparently satisfied, and looked back toward the kitchen. "Can I have a Shirley Temple?" he asked Lena. "Go ask Marco," she said. "Tell him I said a small one." He was already gone, sneakers squeaking, backpack bouncing. She turned back to Dante. His face had changed. She didn't have a precise word for what it had changed into. It was not grief exactly, not joy, not anger, not the cold professional blankness she might have expected from a man who ran what he ran. It was something more volatile than any of those things, something that moved underneath his skin like weather moving under cloud cover, visible in its effects, even when the thing itself stayed hidden. "I need you to leave," she said. "I know you do." "I'm serious." "I know that too." "Dante." She stepped closer, dropping her voice, aware of the tables around them that had returned to a performative normalcy. Forks scraping plates, conversation resumed at the same volume as before, but with a different quality, a listening quality. "Whatever you're thinking, whatever you think you just figured out, you need to walk out of here and not come back, and you need to let me and Noah live the life we've been living, and you need to—" "I'm not going to do that." The words were quiet. They weren't a threat. They were something worse than a threat. They were a statement of simple fact, delivered by someone who had decided on a course of action and was now informing her of it. She looked at him. He looked back at her. "You left," she said. "Yes." "You left without a word. You left and there was nothing. No call, no letter, nothing. I tried to find you. I couldn't find you. I thought—" She stopped. There were things she wasn't going to say in a restaurant, in front of customers, with her son 20 feet away asking Marco about sugar and grenadine. "I thought a lot of things." "I know." "You don't get to just—" He stopped again. Her jaw was tight. She could feel the pressure of 5 years of unsaid things building against the back of her teeth. "You can't just walk in here and look at him and decide you have rights." Something moved across his face. Not defensiveness. Something older and more painful than defensiveness. "I'm not here to take anything from you," he said. "I'm not here to—" He paused, and she watched him choose his words with unusual care, which was not how she remembered him. He'd always been direct to the point of bluntness. "I just need to understand what I'm looking at." "You know what you're looking at." "I need to hear you say it." She was silent for a long moment. The candles around them threw unsteady light. From the kitchen came the sound of Noah laughing at something Marco said. That pure, uncomplicated laugh that still hit her in the chest every time she heard it, even after 6 years. "He's yours," she said, "but he's mine first. He's been mine for 6 years, and you have never been there, and you don't get to—" Her phone buzzed. She ignored it. "You said you tried to find me," Dante said. "I stopped trying." "I know that too." He reached into his coat, and for one absurd moment her body tensed. The animal part of her that lived near the water pitcher she still held in her hand. But he produced a card and held it toward her, plain white, a phone number, nothing else. "I'm not asking for anything tonight. I understand there's a lot that needs to be said before anything else can happen. I understand that." A pause. "But I'm not going to pretend I didn't see what I just saw." She took the card. She didn't know why she took the card. He looked toward the kitchen one more time. She watched his face do the thing again, that involuntary earthquake beneath controlled ground. Then he nodded once, pulled his coat straight, and turned toward the door. His men fell into position around him without being signaled, the trained choreography of security, and the door opened and the cold came in, and then they were gone. Lena stood in the middle of Carmine's dining room with a water pitcher in one hand and a business card in the other, and the snow coming down hard outside the windows, and her son laughing in the kitchen, and 5 years of carefully built walls somewhere in rubble around her feet. The couple at the foretop stared at her. She looked back at them. "Can I get you anything else?" she said. Her voice was completely flat. The woman shook her head. The man asked for the check. She went to print it. She did not cry. She had learned that a long time ago, that you could feel like the floor had dropped out from under you, and still print a check and smile and run a card, and say, "Have a wonderful evening," and walk to the back and lean against the cold metal of the prep counter, and breathe. She looked at the card in her hand. She put it in her apron pocket, next to the pen and the notepad and the phone that had buzzed 3 more times while she wasn't looking. From the kitchen, Noah shouted her name. "Mom, Marco says I can have a big one. Tell him small is okay." And despite everything, despite the fact that her hands were shaking and her chest felt like something had been broken open inside it, she felt the smallest thread of something almost like relief. He didn't know. He couldn't know, not tonight, not yet. But the secret she had carried for 6 years had finally met the world it had always been waiting for. The only question now was what the world was going to do with it. She got home at 10:15. Noah was already in his pajamas, but not in bed, which was the usual state of affairs. He had a gift for looking like he was complying with the letter of a rule while violating its spirit entirely. He was on the couch with a picture book that Lena was fairly certain he wasn't reading, being held upside down as it was. Mrs. Calloway met her at the door with the tired patience of a 63-year-old woman who had been doing Lena a favor for 3 years and knew it. "He walked here," she said. "I know. I saw him. I couldn't stop him. He's very determined." "He gets that from his father," Lena said before she could catch herself. Then, "Thank you, Rita. Really." She paid her, saw her out, locked the door. Stood in the small hallway of their apartment with her coat still on and the cold still coming off her in waves. "Mom." Noah had appeared in the doorway, book tucked under his arm. "You look weird." "I'm tired." "You look more weird than tired." She crouched down in front of him. He submitted to this with mild tolerance, the way children tolerate parental scrutiny when they know they haven't technically done anything wrong. She looked at his face, at those eyes, steel blue and specific and completely his own, even when they were entirely someone else's, and she put her hands on his shoulders and held on. "What's wrong?" he said, softer now, his voice shifting into the register he used when he sensed she needed the gentler version of him. "Nothing," she said. "I just missed you. I saw you literally 2 hours ago at the restaurant." "I know." She stood. "Bed." "Mom?" "Bed, Noah." He went, but slowly, with the maximum amount of theatrical reluctance he could generate, and she listened to the sounds of him brushing his teeth and not quite shutting his bedroom door, and the specific kind of quiet that meant he was reading by flashlight, which she always pretended not to know about. She sat down at the kitchen table. She pulled the card from her apron pocket and set it on the table in front of her. A phone number. Nothing else. She thought about everything Dante had said and hadn't said. She thought about the 5 years. She thought about the night she'd understood he was really gone. Not a phone call she'd missed, not a misunderstanding, but gone. Surgically and completely, the way someone disappears when they mean to disappear. She had fallen apart in a way she never told anyone about. She had put herself back together the way you do when there's no one to witness the falling apart, quietly and without ceremony, piece by piece, until she was functional if not whole. Then she'd found out about Noah. She had not thought about Dante Morelli in a long time. This was not true. She had thought about him in the specific way you think about a wound you've learned to work around. Not constantly, not obsessively, but always at the edge of awareness, always the reference point for a category of feeling you stopped letting yourself feel. Her phone buzzed on the table. A number she didn't recognize. She stared at it. Then she picked up. "I need you to understand something." She kept her voice low. Noah's light was off. She could tell by the gap under his door. "He doesn't know about you. He has never known about you. And the way things are going to continue is that I'm going to decide how and when and if any of that changes. Not you. Do you understand me?" Silence on the other end. Then, "Yes. I'm not saying never. I'm not saying I don't." She stopped, pressed her thumb and forefinger against her eyes. "I need time." "Okay. That's it? Just okay?" "What do you want me to say, Lena?" "I want you to explain to me why you left." Her voice had gone strange, low and fractured at the edges. "Before anything else happens. Before I let you anywhere near him. I want you to tell me what happened, because I have spent 5 years trying to build a story that makes sense out of a man who looked me in the eye and told me I was his entire world and then vanished like I never existed. And I need—" She stopped, breathed. "I need that to make sense before I can let you back into anything." The silence this time was longer. When he spoke, his voice had something in it she'd never heard there before, something worn down to its essential shape. "I will tell you everything," he said, "but not on the phone. I'm not meeting you somewhere. Tomorrow, wherever you want, a public place. Bring Noah to school first, pick the spot. I'll be there." She was silent. "There are things you need to know," he said, "that are going to change how you understand what happened. And some of them—" A pause. "Some of them aren't going to be easy to hear, and I need you to hear them before—" He stopped. Something tightened in his voice. "There are other people who know about tonight, Lena. About me being at that restaurant. About Noah." Her stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" "It means I need you to hear what I have to say." His voice was careful now, each word precise. "It means that you being careful matters. It means that tomorrow, wherever you choose, I'll explain everything. All of it. 5 years worth." "Who?" she said. "Who knows? Tomorrow. Dante. Tomorrow." And there was something in that word, in the flatness of it, that was not comfort and not threat and not reassurance. That was simply the acknowledgement of a reality she hadn't yet fully understood. She looked at Noah's door, the dark gap along the floor. "Tomorrow," she said, 9:30, the coffee place on Amsterdam and 73rd, and you come alone." "Alone," he agreed. She hung up. She sat at the kitchen table in the dark kitchen of her small apartment and listened to the city outside and the sound of her son breathing in the next room. And for the first time in 5 years, she felt the specific quality of fear that came not from something present, but from something approaching, something already in motion, something that had been in motion she was beginning to understand, for much longer than tonight. The coffee place on Amsterdam and 73rd was the kind of establishment that had survived 2 decades of Manhattan real estate pressure by being aggressively ordinary. No exposed brick, no pour-over ceremony, no chalkboard with rotating single origins. Just coffee, thick and hot, in ceramic mugs that had been through the dishwasher so many times the logos had worn down to ghosts. Lena had been coming here since before Noah was born. The woman behind the counter knew her order. That familiarity had always felt like safety. It didn't feel like safety this morning. She arrived at 9:20, took the table in the back corner with the wall behind her and a clear line to the door, and wrapped both hands around her mug and waited. She had dropped Noah at school 40 minutes ago. He'd been distracted, chattier than usual, wanting to tell her about a book he'd started reading about deep-sea creatures, and she'd listened with the part of herself that was always available for him, while the other part ran calculations she couldn't shut off. What if he asks about the man from last night? What if someone followed me to the school? What if... She stopped those thoughts the same way she'd been stopping them since 2 in the morning, when she'd finally given up on sleep and sat at the kitchen table with cold coffee and the business card and the darkness pressing in at the windows. She stopped them because they didn't help. They never helped. Dante walked in at 9:29, alone, as he'd said. He was in dark jeans and a charcoal sweater, no overcoat today, which meant she could see the exact dimensions of him without the additional architecture of expensive wool, broader through the shoulders than she'd registered last night, the kind of build that came from something more functional than a gym. He scanned the room in that automatic way, found her, and came directly to the table without ordering anything first. He sat down across from her. Up close in daylight, he looked different than he had in the candlelit restaurant. More human, somehow. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there 5 years ago, or maybe they had been and she hadn't let herself see them. A small scar at the edge of his jaw, new. The gray at his temples was new too, just beginning, just enough to register. She said nothing. She waited. He put his hands flat on the table, looked at them, then looked at her. "My father ordered me to leave you," he said. No preamble, no softening. 5 years ago, he found out about us. I don't know how. I never figured out exactly who told him, but he found out and he called me in and he put it very simply. He said if I didn't end it, he'd end you. The ceramic mug was warm against her palms. She kept holding it. He said it like that, Dante continued. Not a threat. A policy statement. He had people watching you already. He showed me photographs. Your apartment building, the diner you were working at, the route you walked to the subway. He wanted me to understand the scope of what he was describing. That it wasn't a bluff, and it wasn't negotiable. A pause. I believed him. I had reasons to believe him. So you just left. I left that night. I didn't call because a call could be traced, could be recorded, could give him a reason to decide I hadn't actually complied. I didn't write because... He stopped. His jaw worked once. I couldn't write what I needed to say in a way that would make sense to you, without also explaining things I couldn't explain. Things about what my father was and what our family was, and what that meant for anyone near me. You could have found a way. Maybe. He didn't argue it. Probably. But I was 29 and I'd just been told the woman I... He stopped again, recalibrated. I made a decision in about 45 seconds that I've had 5 years to reconsider. Lena set down her mug. Her voice, when it came, was very quiet and very even, which was the register she used when she was most furious. I thought you were dead, she said. For the first 3 months, I thought something had happened to you. I went to places I shouldn't have gone, asked questions I had no business asking because I thought you were in a ditch somewhere and no one was going to tell me. I did that while I was... She stopped. While things were happening that I didn't know about yet, and when I finally understood you were just gone, when I understood it was a choice, she pressed her lips together. Do you have any idea what that does to a person? I know what I... No, you don't. She leaned forward slightly. You made a choice to protect me without telling me there was something to protect me from. You decided unilaterally that my life was something you could rearrange without my input. And then you disappeared, and I had to figure out how to survive that. And then I had to figure out how to survive something else, alone. And I did it. Her voice was controlled, but her hands had tightened around the mug again. I did all of it alone, and I built something, and I am not going to have it dismantled now because you've decided you have feelings about it. Dante was quiet for a moment. Your son, he said. My son. He has my eyes. I know what he has. Lena. Don't. The word came out hard. Don't say his name like that, like you have a claim. You don't have a claim. Claims are built from presence and time and showing up, and you have none of that. I want to fix that. You can't fix 5 years. I'm not trying to fix 5 years. I'm trying to... He exhaled. It was controlled but barely, and she could see him doing the work of keeping himself level, which was something she had not expected. She had expected the cold professional composure of someone who had learned to treat emotion as an operational liability. This was different. This was a man sitting across from her with something cracked open in him that he was only partially managing to contain. "I'm trying to understand what comes next, that's all." "What comes next," she said, "is that you tell me what you meant last night, about other people knowing." His expression changed. The cracked open thing closed back up, replaced by something more measured and more alert, the shift from private to operational. She recognized it even though she'd never been able to name it before. "There's a situation inside my organization," he said. "There has been for about 8 months. A man named Vincenzo Rivas, my underboss. Ambitious, patient, very good at waiting. He's been positioning himself for a while, building alliances, moving pieces. Last night wasn't random. He had people watching the restaurant. Not because of you, because of me. Any move I make is watched right now. And when I went into Carmine's and stayed longer than 20 minutes and came out looking like..." He paused. "He'll want to know why." "And his people saw Noah." "Probably." The word landed in her chest like something physical. "Probably," she repeated. "I'm not going to lie to you about the level of risk to manage your reaction. That's not something I'm willing to do again." He held her gaze. "Yes, it's possible his people registered Noah. It's possible they already know. If Vincenzo does the math the same way I did, he'll know Noah is yours." "Yes." She was silent. Outside the coffee shop windows, Amsterdam Avenue moved through its morning rhythms. Cabs, delivery trucks, a woman walking a large dog who wanted to stop at every lamppost. The ordinary world, the world she'd been living in for 5 years, carefully, quietly, building something sustainable out of the wreckage of what she'd had before. "What does that mean for us?" she said. "Practically, right now. It means I want to move you, not permanently. Somewhere safe for a short period while I handle the situation with Vincenzo. A week, maybe 2. I have a job." "I know." "Noah has school. He has a routine. He has..." She stopped herself because she could hear herself listing ordinary things against an extraordinary threat, and she understood the gap between those two registers was exactly the problem. "I'm not uprooting my son's life because of a situation you created." "I understand that." "Do you?" "I understand it, and I'm asking you anyway." His voice was flat and direct and completely without apology. "Because I would rather have this argument with you for the next 3 hours than have the alternative." She looked at him. He looked back. "I need to think," she said. "Okay. I need more than 12 hours to process everything you've just told me and make decisions about my child's safety." "You have until tonight." He said it without pleasure. "That's not me controlling the timeline. That's the actual timeline." She stood up. He didn't move. "I'll call you," she said. "Don't come to the restaurant. Don't come to my apartment. Don't contact Noah's school." She picked up her coat from the back of her chair. "And if you ever make another decision about my life or my son's life without my input, whatever chance you think you have at being part of either of those things disappears. Permanently. Do you understand me?" "Yes," he said. She left. She walked back toward Broadway in the cold and breathed the sharp air and let herself feel, for exactly 1 block, the full weight of what had just happened. The grief of it, the old wound reopened, the sick, complicated thing that was simultaneously rage and relief, and something she refused to name yet. 1 block. Then she put it back in the pocket behind her sternum and kept walking. She had until tonight. She needed to figure out what she was going to do with that. What? She called in sick to Carmine's for the first time in 14 months. Marco answered and was annoyed, and then heard something in her voice and was less annoyed and told her to feel better and hung up without further comment. She spent the morning calling Noah's school. Family situation, he'll be out a couple days. And then sitting at her kitchen table with her laptop open, doing the things she should have done at 2 in the morning instead of staring at a business card. She started looking into Vincenzo Rivas. She didn't find much. His name didn't appear in anything with a byline or a date stamp. What she found were absences. A man-shaped hole in several news articles about organized crime in New York, that mentioned unnamed sources and unnamed associates and unnamed underbosses. A LinkedIn profile that was aggressively blank. A real estate record. A property in Carroll Gardens under a holding company she traced through 2 shell entities before the trail went cold. What she found, more than anything, was the particular quality of digital silence that surrounded men who were very good at not being found. Her phone rang at 11:47. Unknown number, different from Dante's. She answered it because she answered unknown numbers now, because she'd learned in the last 14 hours that unknown numbers were the ones she needed to be paying attention to. Ms. Hartwell. The voice was male, smooth, with a faint accent she couldn't immediately place, something Eastern European blurred by years of American overlay. Careful. Precise. The voice of someone who chose each word the way a craftsman chooses a tool. I hope I'm not disturbing you. She was very still. Who is this? She said. My name isn't important. What's important is that I'm calling as a courtesy. I want you to understand that. A pause. You had an interesting evening last night. Her hand tightened on the phone. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. The voice stayed smooth, stayed pleasant, in the specific way that pleasantness becomes a form of threat. Dante Morelli is a complicated man to be connected to, Ms. Hartwell. I say this not as a warning, as a fact. He operates in a world that has a particular relationship with the people around him, the people close to him. Another pause. The people who matter to him. What do you want? Right now? Nothing at all. As I said, courtesy call. I wanted you to know that your situation is understood, that you're not invisible. The smile was audible. That there are people paying attention who wish you nothing but well, who would very much prefer that things remain uncomplicated. If you're threatening me, I'm not threatening you. The pleasantness sharpened by a fraction of a degree. I'm offering you a perspective. Dante will tell you that you should trust him, that you should follow his instructions, that he can protect you and your son. He'll believe all of that when he says it. The question you should be asking yourself is whether the history between you gives you any reason to take that at face value. A beat. He left you once, Miss Hartwell. He made that choice quickly and he made it alone. What makes you think the calculus has changed? The line went dead. She sat with the phone in her hand and her heart doing something loud and disorganized in her chest, and tried to assemble what had just happened into a shape she could work with. The voice had been careful, controlled, too smooth for anger and too warm for pure menace. The voice of someone who had done this before, who had refined the technique of destabilizing people through implication rather than statement. Vincenzo Rivas. She couldn't confirm it, but she understood, with the instinct that had kept her functional through 5 years of genuine difficulty, that the voice and the name were the same thing. She called Dante. He picked up on the second ring. Someone just called me, she said. A man. He didn't give his name. He knew about last night. He knew my name. Silence on his end. Then, what did he say? She told him. Precisely, without editorial, every word she could remember. She'd always had a good memory for dialogue. It was one of the things that made her good at her job, the ability to recall exactly what a customer had asked for 3 tables ago. When she finished, the silence on Dante's end had a different quality than before. Denser. How did he get your number? She said. I don't know yet. That's not... I know it's not good enough. I know that. His voice was controlled, but she could hear something underneath it, something that moved fast and cold. Lena, I need you to pack a bag for you and Noah, tonight. Don't call anyone. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Go pick Noah up from... He's not at school. I pulled him this morning. A beat. Good. That was good. I need you to tell me how serious this is. I'm telling you to pack a bag. That's not an answer. It's the only answer that matters right now. His voice was flat and final. Serious enough that I'm not going to spend time on the phone explaining the gradations of serious. Pack a bag, get Noah, and text me when you're ready to move. Don't use the front entrance of your building. Dante, please. The word came out different from everything else he'd said. Rougher, stripped of the operational calm, just a man asking. Please just do this. She closed her eyes for 1 second. "Give me an hour," she said. She hung up and went to Noah's room and pulled his backpack off the hook behind his door, the orange one, the one he'd had since kindergarten, and started moving through his drawers with the efficiency of a woman who had learned early how to pack fast and think later. Noah came out of his room where he'd been reading, saw her packing, and went still in the doorway with the alertness of a child who understood that adults moving quickly meant something had changed. "Are we going somewhere?" he said. "For a couple days." She kept her voice level. "An adventure." He looked at the backpack. He looked at her face. He was 6, but he was not easily fooled, and he had her eyes when it came to reading rooms. "Is it because of the man from last night?" he said. She stopped packing, turned and looked at him. "Why would you think that?" she said carefully. Noah shrugged with the elaborate casualness of a child pretending to be less perceptive than he was. "You looked weird after he left. And then you were on the phone late. I heard you talking." She crossed the room and crouched in front of him and looked at his face. Those steel blue eyes steady and watchful and entirely his father's. And she chose her words with the specific care of a mother who had always committed to honesty even when honesty was hard. "Something came up," she said. "We're going to stay somewhere else for a couple of days while I sort it out. You and me, okay?" He studied her. "Is the man from the restaurant going to be there?" "I don't know yet." Noah was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with the considered tone of someone reaching a conclusion, "He looked at me weird." "What do you mean weird?" "Like," he searched for the word, "like when you look at something you thought was gone and it comes back. Like when I found my old stuffed bear in the closet." He paused. "That kind of weird." Lena's throat closed. "Go put your shoes on," she said. He went. She finished packing in 4 minutes and stood in her small living room and looked around at the apartment she'd built slowly and carefully from nothing. The photos on the wall, the plants on the windowsill, the crayon drawings Noah had made last year still taped above the radiator, and felt the cold specific fear of someone who understands that the life they've constructed is lighter than they thought, that it can be lifted and moved by forces they didn't consent to. Her phone buzzed, a text from Dante. "Car outside your building. Side entrance. Blue sedan. Driver's name is Felix. He knows not to ask questions." She looked at the text for a long moment. She thought about what the smooth-voiced man had said. "He left you once. What makes you think the calculus has changed?" She thought about Noah's face in the kitchen doorway, watching her pack. She thought about 5 years of building something out of wreckage, and the particular exhaustion of being someone who was good at surviving things she never should have had to survive. Then she picked up the bag, called Noah's name, and walked toward the door. She had chosen a direction. She didn't know yet if it was the right one, but the phone call this morning had removed the option of standing still, and standing still had never really been her strongest move anyway. She was halfway down the stairwell when her phone buzzed again. Not Dante's number. The unknown number from before. A single text. No words. Just a photograph. She stopped walking. Noah bumped into her from behind and said "Mom" in the tone of mild protest, and she put one hand back to hold him still and looked at her screen with a coldness spreading from her chest outward into her arms and fingers. The photograph was taken from outside. Through glass. Slightly blurred with distance and weather, but clear enough. It was Noah's classroom, this morning, before she'd pulled him, his orange backpack visible, his profile turned toward the window, his steel blue eyes catching the light in a way that was unmistakable to anyone who knew what they were looking for. Below the photograph, 3 words appeared. "We see everything." The stairwell was very quiet. Somewhere above her, a neighbor's television murmured. The building settled around her with the creaks and sighs of old construction. Noah pressed against her back, and she could feel his warmth and his breathing and the complete unsuspecting trust of a child who had not yet been given reason to be afraid. She texted Dante with one hand, the other still holding the bag. "They were at Noah's school this morning, before I pulled him. They have a photo." His response came in under 15 seconds. "Don't stop moving." She didn't stop moving. Down the last flight of stairs through the building's side corridor that smelled of old radiator heat and someone's cooking, out the metal door that opened onto the narrow service alley running parallel to her street. Noah was pressed close behind her, no longer asking questions, reading her body the way he always read her body, with that uncanny accuracy that had always unsettled her slightly, the sense that her son understood more than she put into words. The blue sedan was where Dante had said it would be. Engine running. A man in the driver's seat, 40s, broad-faced, hands relaxed on the wheel, who didn't turn around when they got in, didn't speak, just pulled smoothly into traffic as soon as the door closed. Felix. He knows not to ask questions. Noah sat against her side and looked out the window at Manhattan moving past and said nothing. She put her arm around him. He let her. She watched the street behind them in the side mirror. She didn't know what she was looking for. She looked anyway. Her phone buzzed. Dante. Where are you? She texted their cross street. His response? 20 minutes. Don't get out of the car. She looked at the photograph again. Noah's profile through glass, his orange backpack. The steel blue eyes catching winter light in a way that was specific and unmistakable and entirely his father's. And she thought about how long they must have been watching. Not since last night, not since Carmine's, but before. Before she even knew she was being watched. Before she'd known there was anything to watch for. The thought moved through her like ice water and settled somewhere below her stomach and stayed there. She put the phone face down on her thigh and looked at the back of Felix's head and breathed. The safe house was in Greenpoint, third floor of a narrow building above a dry cleaner, accessed through an interior staircase that smelled of solvent and old wood. It was clean inside, sparse, functional, the kind of clean that wasn't domestic but operational, the clean of a space maintained for purpose rather than comfort. A couch, a table, 2 bedrooms with the doors open, a kitchen with the basics stocked, blinds on all the windows, already drawn. Noah walked in, looked around, and said, "This is like a spy movie." "Go pick a bedroom," she said. He went, apparently satisfied. She stood in the main room with her bag still over her shoulder and listened to the sounds of him investigating his options. Drawers opening and closing, the creak of a mattress being tested, and stared at the drawn blinds over the window and felt the particular quality of a life that had been compressed, suddenly and without adequate preparation, into a single bag and a borrowed room. Dante arrived 11 minutes later. He came in with 2 other men she didn't recognize, younger than Felix, alert, the same quality of professional attention as the men from Carmine's, but less polished, more angular. They took up positions in the hallway without being told to and stayed there. She registered them the way she registered furniture. Dante closed the door. He looked at her. He looked at the closed bedroom door behind which Noah was still conducting his investigation. He looked back at her. "Show me the photograph," he said. She held out her phone. He took it, looked at it for a long time, longer than necessary to absorb the image, she thought, as though he was memorizing it or measuring something in it, and then set the phone on the table between them with controlled deliberateness. "The school," he said. "What time did you drop him?" 7:55. "And you pulled him at?" "Around 9:15, after I left you." She crossed her arms. "They were there in that window. They had someone there before I even knew there was a threat to worry about, which means they weren't watching him because of last night." She waited. "Which means they knew about Noah before Carmine's." Dante's jaw tightened. He didn't deny it. "How long?" she said. "I don't know." "That's not an answer. I know it isn't." He pulled out one of the chairs at the table but didn't sit, just held the back of it, standing. "Vincenzo has resources I don't have full visibility on. He's been building his network for 8 months that I know of, probably longer. If he had someone watching me before last night, if." The word came out sharp and thin. "You're using the word if like there's uncertainty here. They had a photograph of my son in his classroom this morning. That is not surveillance that started last night." "No," he said. "It's not." The room was quiet. From behind the closed door, Noah had stopped moving around. Either he'd settled somewhere or he was listening. Probably both. "Tell me what you know," she said. "All of it. Not the version where you manage what I can handle. The actual version." Dante looked at her for a moment. The look of a man assessing what honesty is going to cost him. And then he sat down, He told her. Vincenzo Rivas had been his father's man before he was Dante's. 15 years inside the organization, trusted and patient and never visibly ambitious, which was in retrospect the first and most important warning sign. When Dante's father died, 8 months ago, a stroke, nothing dramatic, just a man in his 60s who had run on cortisol and fury for 4 decades, finally running out of both, the transfer of authority had seemed clean. Dante had taken the organization, Vincenzo had remained in his position, the machine had continued. What Dante had not understood, not initially, was that Vincenzo had spent 15 years building a parallel structure inside the organization. Not against Dante's father, the old man had been too dangerous to move against directly, but against the succession, against whoever came next, against the inevitable moment when the generation changed and the new leadership was still finding its footing. That moment was now. He's been moving money, Dante said, realigning relationships. Some of the captains who I thought were mine, he stopped, adjusted. Some of the captains are his. I'm still mapping it. I don't know the full count. And Noah. Noah is leverage, the cleanest kind. His voice was flat, clinical, the way a doctor's voice goes flat when the clinical distance is the only thing keeping him functional. A child I didn't know about. A woman outside the organization who has no protection. A secret that, if it's real, and he knows it's real, changes my priorities entirely, changes what I'll sacrifice and what I won't. So we're a weapon, she said, against you. Yes. She absorbed that. She turned it over. She found the edges of it and understood them. The call this morning, she said. He was testing me. Yes. Trying to put distance between us. Make me trust you less. She looked at Dante. Which means he doesn't want me running to you. He wants me isolated. Something shifted in Dante's eyes. Surprise, and then something that might have been a grim form of respect. Yes, he said again. So what's the play? She said. Your play, right now. Right now the play is keeping you and Noah here while I work the problem from my end. I have people I trust. Not many, but some. I'm moving to identify which captains are still solid, cut off Vincenzo's financing, and how long? A week, maybe 10 days, and we stay here for 10 days. It's safe. It's a room above a dry cleaner in Greenpoint. She kept her voice low and even. And I'm going to tell you something, Dante. And I need you to hear it as information, not as emotion, because right now I'm trying to stay functional. She leaned forward slightly. I understand that you're trying to protect us. I understand that you have resources, and I don't, and that this location is probably more defensible than my apartment. I understand all of that. But I need you to understand that I am not a person who waits in a room while other people decide what happens to my life. I have never been that person, and putting me in a room and telling me to wait is going to make me a problem for you. He looked at her. What do you want? He said. Information, all of it, as it develops. I want to know what Vincenzo knows, what he's planning, and what the realistic timeline is. I want to be treated like someone with standing in this situation, not like a variable you're managing. You're not trained for... I raised a child alone for 6 years in New York City while working double shifts, and I survived your father's organization dismantling my future without explanation. Her voice was quiet and absolutely steady. I'm not asking to be armed and sent into the field. I'm asking to be informed. There is a difference. Dante was silent for a long moment. Okay, he said. Okay. The bedroom door opened. Noah appeared in his socks, backpack abandoned, looking at both of them with the frank assessment of a child who has correctly identified that a significant conversation has just ended. Are you two arguing? He said. We're talking, Lena said. It sounded like arguing. It was complicated talking. Noah looked at Dante. Dante looked at Noah. It was the first time they'd been in the same space since the restaurant, and it had a different quality here. Closer, quieter, no crowded room as buffer. Noah was doing the thing he did with new people, the systematic evaluation, filing information into categories Lena could never fully see. You're the man from the restaurant, Noah said. I am, Dante said. You came with us. Yes, because something's wrong. It was not a question. Dante glanced at Lena. She gave him nothing. This was his answer to give or not give. There's a situation that needs to be handled, Dante said. Your mom and I are handling it. You're safe. Noah considered this. Are you her boyfriend? Noah, Lena started. I'm asking him. Dante held the boy's gaze with an equanimity that Lena found, despite everything, quietly remarkable. I'm someone who cares very much about making sure nothing happens to you or your mother. Noah processed this answer the way he processed most things, with visible internal machinery, turning it over, checking its weight. Then he nodded once, apparently filing it in an acceptable category, and looked at Lena. Can I have something to eat? He said. There's food in there, but I wasn't sure if I was allowed. Go eat, she said. I'll be there in a minute. He disappeared into the kitchen. The sound of cabinet doors opening followed. She turned back to Dante. He was still watching the space where Noah had been, that look on his face again, the earthquake under controlled ground, the man measuring something vast and irreversible. He's remarkable, Dante said quietly. She didn't answer. This wasn't the moment for that. I'll have someone bring things, she said, books for him. He'll need things to do or he'll take the walls apart. He doesn't do well with nothing to do. I'll take care of it, and I want a phone I can trust. Not this one. She held up her regular phone. If they have my number, this is a liability. I'll have one here within the hour. She nodded. She picked up her bag from where she'd set it down and moved toward the kitchen. She stopped at the doorway. Without turning around, Dante. Yes. The reason he could get to my son's school. The reason someone had my number. She kept her voice neutral, precise. Vincenzo had to know where to look. He had to know about me specifically. Not just that you were at Carmine's last night. He had to know to look at me. A beat. Somebody told him, before last night, someone who knew about us. About 5 years ago. The silence behind her was very particular. I know, Dante said. You have a leak. I know that too. She went into the kitchen. The leak had a name by 9 o'clock that night. Dante had spent the afternoon in the main room with his phone and one of the men from the hallway, a quiet, focused person named Adrian who communicated mostly in short phrases and occasionally in silence, running down the thread that Lena had identified. The logic was simple and brutal. Vincenzo had known about her before Carmine's. Vincenzo knew she had a child. Vincenzo had operational details, her phone number, Noah's school, that required a source with direct knowledge of her connection to Dante. The pool of people with that knowledge was small. The pool of people in that group who also had access to Vincenzo's parallel network was smaller. It came down to a man named Sal Greco, who had been Dante's father's personal secretary for 11 years and had rolled over into Dante's organization the same way all the old man's people had rolled over, apparently seamlessly, apparently loyally. Sal Greco, who had been present 5 years ago when Dante's father had made the order about Lena. Sal Greco, who had known everything and had been paid, apparently, to pass it along at the appropriate moment. Dante told her at 9:15. He sat across from her at the small kitchen table while Noah slept in the next room and laid it out with the flat precision of someone delivering an operational briefing, which was what it was because she had asked to be informed, and he was holding to that. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. He knew, she said. Sal knew about Noah. He would have known you were pregnant when I left. He was present for most of that period. Dante stopped. He would have known. And he told Vincenzo. Yes. When? I don't know exactly. Recent months. When Vincenzo started actively building his position. Lena looked at the table surface, the grain of the wood, the ring left by her coffee cup from an hour ago. These small ordinary things that the mind finds when it needs something to hold on to while it processes information that has no safe container. So Vincenzo has known about Noah for months, she said. He's had months to plan whatever he's planning. He had people at that school before any of this started, before Carmine's, before last night. He was already positioned. She looked up. And you didn't know? No. Because you trusted Sal. Yes. So when you walked into that restaurant last night, she said very carefully, and you saw Noah, and you started making decisions about moving us and protecting us, you were already behind. He was already ahead of you. He'd already built the play. She paused. Last night wasn't the beginning of this. Last night was him triggering something he'd already set up. Dante's expression didn't change, but something in him went very quiet. Yes, he said. That's right. She breathed out through her nose. Okay. Lena, I'm not falling apart. I'm thinking. She pressed both palms flat against the table. If he triggered it last night, then he has a next move. Something he's been planning to do once you were committed. Once you'd shown your hand about Noah. She looked at him. What's the move? What does he gain by exposing us? He issues a challenge. Public, inside the organization. He tells the captains that I have a secret child, that I've been compromised, that I'm making decisions with my emotions instead of the business. He uses it to justify a move against my leadership. Dante's jaw was tight. It's a classical play. Destabilize the king by showing he has something to lose. The captains who are still on the fence, and there are some, they watch how I respond. If I pull back, protect the family, seem like I'm running scared, I lose them. If I come forward and expose the situation myself, you declare Noah publicly, she said slowly, and then he becomes even more of a target. Yes. So either way, Vincenzo wins a round. His voice was flat. Unless I take the board apart before he can use it. She looked at him for a long moment. The kitchen was small and very quiet. The dry cleaner below had closed hours ago, and the building had settled into its night sounds. When you say take the board apart, she said, I mean move against him directly, before he moves against me. Tonight, tomorrow. It needs to be fast. He's expecting me to be defensive, to circle around the people I'm protecting, to play cautiously. I do the opposite. And what does that look like? He told her. It was not a comfortable thing to hear. She had understood abstractly what Dante was and what his world was, and what the language of take the board apart actually meant in practical terms. But there was a significant difference between abstract understanding and sitting in a kitchen in Greenpoint at 9:30 at night, listening to a man you once loved describe, in precise operational detail, what he intended to do to the man who had photographed your son through his classroom window. She did not look away. She did not flinch. She listened to all of it. When he finished, she said, and if it goes wrong, it won't. That's not an answer. If it goes wrong, he said slowly, then you take Noah and you use the names I'm going to give you, and you go to a place I'm going to tell you about, and you stay there until someone comes for you. Someone I trust completely. A pause. There are 2 people in my organization I trust completely. One of them is outside this building right now. The other one, he stopped. Something changed in his face. The controlled professional surface he'd maintained through most of this conversation cracked open in a specific and sudden way, the way a windshield cracks. Not shattering, but the structural integrity going all at once. The whole thing suddenly held together only by habit. His phone was on the table between them. It lit up. He looked at it. She watched his face. She watched the color leave it. He picked up the phone. He read what was on the screen. He read it twice. She could tell by the way his eyes moved. Then he set the phone down and looked at the wall above her head and said nothing for 3 full seconds. What? She said. He turned the phone so she could see the screen. It was a video, 11 seconds long, shot in what appeared to be a parking structure. Concrete pillars, bad fluorescent lighting, the particular visual grammar of underground spaces. There were 3 men visible, 2 standing, 1 on his knees. She recognized the man on his knees from the photograph Dante had shown her earlier in the evening, Adrian, who had been in the hallway, who had been sent 2 hours ago to pick up the new phone for her and a bag of things for Noah, and to confirm the location of the man named Sal Greco. Adrian was on his knees in a parking structure, and one of the standing men was holding the phone, and the other was looking directly at the camera with a pleasant, patient expression. She recognized the second man. She had never seen his face before, but she recognized him from the quality of his patience, from the specific pleasantness of his expression, from the way he occupied the frame, with the absolute comfort of a man who understood that he was the most dangerous person in any room he entered. Vincenzo Rivas looked exactly like his voice had sounded. He looked at the camera for a moment, and then he looked to his side, and he said something she couldn't hear through the silent video, and the third man, the one holding Adrian, stepped back, and then Vincenzo crouched down in front of Adrian the same way Dante had crouched down in front of Noah in the restaurant, and he said something very close to Adrian's face. Adrian didn't answer. Or maybe he did. The video was silent. Then Vincenzo stood and straightened his jacket and looked back at the camera. He held up a piece of paper. She leaned forward to read it. 2 words, written in block letters large enough to be unmistakable even through the grain of the video. Choose now. The video ended. Dante's hand was very still on the table. She looked at his face and found something she had never seen there before in the years she'd known him and the years she'd spent trying to forget him. Not the controlled professional calm, not the earthquake under the surface, but something that had gone past both of those things into somewhere quieter and colder and more final. He has Adrian, she said. Yes. He wants you to respond tonight. Yes. And if you move against him to protect Adrian, you expose your position. You show him where you are and what you have. She was thinking out loud, running the logic fast and clean, the way she thought when she was in the weeds during a bad service and needed to triage. He doesn't actually want Adrian. He wants to make you move before you're ready. Dante looked at her. Something in his expression shifted. Recognition and the particular pain of being understood by someone you've underestimated. And if you don't move, she said, Adrian, I know. The kitchen was very quiet. The building settled around them. In the other room, Noah breathed in the steady, uncomplicated rhythm of a child who trusted that the adults outside his door were handling things. There's something else, Dante said. She looked at him. He reached into his jacket and removed a folded piece of paper and set it on the table in front of her. His hand stayed on it for a moment before he slid it across. She unfolded it. It was a scan of a document. Old. The paper's age translated poorly through the digital reproduction. Yellowed at the margins, the type slightly uneven in the way of documents produced before everything was digital and perfect. A legal document, she thought at first. Some kind of official record. She read the header. Then she read the body. Then she read it again, more slowly, because the first read hadn't fully assembled into something she could believe. It was dated 5 years and 4 months ago, 3 months before Dante had disappeared from her life. It was a document prepared by a man named Caruso, an attorney whose name she didn't know, and it detailed a formal arrangement between Dante's father, Enzo Morelli, and a man named Richard Hale. Richard Hale, her father. The document described, in the precise bloodless language of legal agreements, an arrangement by which Richard Hale, who had debts she had known nothing about, gambling debts, the kind that accrued interest in ways that banks didn't, had been cleared of those obligations in exchange for ongoing provision of information regarding his daughter, Lena Hartwell, her movements, her relationships, her circumstances. Her father had been informing on her to Dante's father for the entirety of her relationship with Dante. He had told Enzo Morelli about her, had provided the photographs, the routes, the schedule, had been the source of the intelligence that allowed Dante's father to issue the order that sent Dante out of her life in 45 seconds on a night 5 years ago, had been paid to do it, had accepted the trade, his daughter's future for his own financial survival, and had never told her, had been, she understood now, the reason Vincenzo had a phone number that wasn't in any system, had been feeding information into a chain that ran from her kitchen table straight into the heart of everything that had destroyed her and rebuilt her and destroyed her again in the last 24 hours. Her father, who called every Sunday, who had been at Noah's last birthday, who had held her son and laughed and asked about his week and then hung up and... She set the document down. Her hands were completely steady. This frightened her more than shaking would have. "Where did you get this?" she said. Her voice was someone else's voice, flat and precise and entirely disconnected from the thing happening inside her chest. "Sal Greco's files," Dante said. Adrian found it before he stopped. Before tonight. My father, she said. Yes. He's been. She stopped, started again. For how long? The document covers the period of our relationship. I don't know what came before or after. I don't know if he's still. Does Vincenzo know about this document? I don't know. Does he have my father? The silence was a fraction of a second too long. Dante. Her voice sharpened. Does Vincenzo have my father? There was a second video, Dante said quietly. It came in 30 seconds before the first one. I didn't show you because... Show me. Lena, show me right now. He picked up the phone. He turned it to face her. He pressed play. The second video was 4 seconds long. Interior space, indeterminate. A man seated in a chair, hands behind his back, face turned away from the camera. He turned toward the camera at the end of the 4 seconds. Her father's face. Older than she was used to seeing it, somehow, in this light, in this context. Older and afraid in the way that people look afraid when the performance of calm has been stripped away entirely, and what's left underneath is just a person who understands what they've done and what it has cost. He looked directly at the camera. He looked exactly like a man who knew that the daughter he had betrayed was going to see this. The video ended. Lena sat in the kitchen of a safe house in Greenpoint at 9:47 at night with the document on the table in front of her and her son sleeping in the next room and the man she had loved and lost and found again sitting across from her, and she felt something she had never felt before in her entire life. Not grief, not rage, not fear, but all three simultaneously fused into something new that had no name and no safe outlet and no bottom she could find. She stood up. She walked to the window. The blinds were closed. She put one hand flat against the wall beside the window and stood there with her back to Dante and breathed. Once, twice, 3 times. He's my father, she said. To the wall, to herself, to the blinds. He's my father, and he has Noah's grandfather, and he is using him to, She stopped. She turned around. Something had changed in her face. Dante saw it. She watched him see it. And whatever he found there made him go very still. She had built her life out of wreckage twice. She knew what the third time felt like, and it felt like this. The moment when you stopped grieving the thing that was destroyed and started calculating what you were going to build in its place. Colder than grief. More useful. I need you to listen to me very carefully, she said, because I'm going to tell you what we're going to do, and I need you to understand that this is not a request, and I am not asking for your protection or your permission. She crossed back to the table and put both hands on it and looked at him. Vincenzo has my father, he has Adrian. He issued an ultimatum tonight because he wants you reactive and exposed and making decisions from emotion. She paused. So we give him what he wants. Dante looked at her. We give him the reaction he's expecting, she said. We give him the exposed position. We give him exactly what he thinks he's getting. And while he's looking at that, while he's watching what he expects to, she didn't finish the sentence that night. She finished it in the next 2 hours, in pieces, at the kitchen table with Dante and a man named Caruso, not the attorney, a different Caruso, younger, with quick eyes, and a laptop that he treated like an extension of his nervous system. And by midnight, they had something that resembled a plan, in the way that a controlled demolition resembles destruction, the same materials, the same physics, but aimed. The plan was simple. Simple plans were the only ones that survived contact with reality. Vincenzo expected Dante to move on Adrian's location, expected the emotional response of a man protecting his own, expected Dante to expose his position and his resources in a predictable defensive pattern, so they gave him the exposure. They sent the response he was waiting for, through a channel they knew Vincenzo was monitoring, with just enough operational detail to look authentic and just enough sloppiness to look like a man making decisions under pressure. What they didn't send was their actual position. What they didn't send was Lena. She had argued for 40 minutes about the next part. Dante had argued back with the focused intensity of a man who had found something worth protecting and was not willing to negotiate its safety. They had reached an agreement that satisfied neither of them, which Lena recognized as the definition of a functional compromise. Noah stayed. That was non-negotiable from both sides, and therefore not argued. He stayed with Felix, who had the quality of a man who had spent decades in proximity to dangerous situations and had developed, as a consequence, an almost supernatural patience. Felix and Noah had, in the 3 hours since their arrival, bonded over a card game that Felix apparently kept in his jacket pocket on general principle. When Lena looked in on Noah at midnight, he was asleep with a card still held loosely in one hand, his face slack and unguarded, and entirely trusting. She stood in the doorway for a long time. Then she went and changed into the clothes that were not her clothes, dark, practical, the right kind of nothing, and came back into the main room and found Dante and Caruso finishing their preparations. Dante looked at her. He didn't tell her she didn't have to come. She wouldn't have forgiven him if he had. "Ready," she said. They went. The shipping terminal at Red Hook occupied the waterfront like something the city had forgotten about. A complex of steel and concrete and corrugated metal structures that had been partially decommissioned years ago, partially repurposed, partially just left to weather and rust and accumulate the particular darkness of large spaces that no longer had a clear function. At this hour, in February, it was a geography of shadow and cold. The river smell came off the harbor in waves, salt and diesel, and something older underneath, the smell of water that had witnessed a long time. They came in from the east, through a gap in the perimeter fence that Caruso had identified from site maps, on foot from 2 blocks out. Dante ahead, Lena second, 2 men behind her whose names she hadn't asked for because she had a feeling their names were not the relevant information about them. The ground was uneven, frozen gravel and cracked asphalt and occasional patches of black ice, and she watched where she put her feet and kept her breathing steady and tried not to think about Noah's face in the doorway of the bedroom back in Greenpoint. She thought about it anyway. She put it somewhere she could carry it without it slowing her down. The terminal complex had 3 main structures. The largest, a cargo warehouse, 200 feet long, high ceilings, multiple access points, was where the signal had originated. Vincenzo's people had been using it intermittently for 6 months, according to Caruso's intelligence. Not as a primary base, as a flex base, the kind of place you used when you needed something that wasn't traceable back to anything permanent. The kind of place you brought people when the conversation needed to happen somewhere that didn't have neighbors. Dante stopped at the corner of the easternmost outbuilding and held up a hand. Everyone stopped. He listened. She listened alongside him and heard what she thought was wind in metal structures and what might have been something else, a generator maybe, or voices carrying through walls. He turned to her. In the darkness, his face was mostly shadow, and the edge of his jaw and the particular quality of his focus, which had always been one of the things about him she couldn't quite describe to herself. Not intensity exactly, more like the absence of distraction. Everything unnecessary stripped away until what remained was the essential Dante, the version of him that existed before all the accumulated weight of who he was. "East entrance," he said, barely above a murmur. 30 feet. 2 guards, both armed. We go through when... She grabbed his arm. He stopped. She was looking past him at a section of shadow near the base of the main structure that wasn't behaving like shadow. It was shadow with a quality of presence, the kind that has mass and breath and a heart rate. A figure, crouched low, moving parallel to the building's eastern wall. Dante saw it the same moment she pointed. His hand came up in a silent signal to the men behind them. Then the figure stopped, turned, and even in the near-complete darkness, even from 40 feet away, she recognized the way someone moves when they are injured. The compensation, the favoring, the particular economy of a body that has learned in the last several hours that certain movements cost more than others. Adrian. He'd gotten out, or been let out, which was a different thing entirely, a thing with implications she didn't have time to process. Dante moved first, crossing the open ground in a low, fast line, and she followed, and the 2 men behind her spread wide without being told. Adrian's face, when they reached him, was a map of the last 6 hours. His left eye was swollen to a slit. He was holding his right side in the way of a man with cracked ribs, or worse. His breathing had a wet edge to it that she registered and filed. "How many?" Dante said. No greeting. No visible reaction to the state of him. "Inside." Adrian's voice was thick, air moving past damage. 8 that I saw. Maybe 2 more I didn't see. Vincenzo is in the main space. Your father... He stopped, looked at Lena, corrected himself. The other man is in the back. Separate room, east side. Her father was alive. She absorbed this and held it at arm's length because she could not look at it directly right now without losing the cold clarity she needed. He let you go, Dante said. It wasn't a question. Adrian's face said yes without him saying anything. He wanted you to find us, Dante said. He wanted me to find you. He doesn't know about... Adrian's eyes moved to Lena again. He doesn't know she's here. I don't think. Then we still have something, Dante said. He looked at Lena. She looked back at him. The cold was very specific out here, the wind off the harbor cutting through every layer and finding the bones. Her hands were cold. Her face was cold. Her lungs processed the air in the particular way they did when she was frightened and refusing to perform the fear, keeping it internal and metabolic, fuel instead of paralysis. East entrance, she said. I heard a generator, which means lights inside, which means they can see whoever comes through the main approaches. Yes? But they're watching for you. They're watching for men coming in force. She scanned the building's facade. High on the eastern wall, a series of ventilation apertures covered with corrugated grills. Too small for anyone Dante's size, not too small for her. Give me 10 minutes before you go in the front. Dante's jaw tightened. Lena, I'm not asking. She held his gaze. 10 minutes. I go in through the east wall. I find my father. I get him out. You come through the front entrance and you draw Vincenzo's attention toward you. She paused. He's not expecting me. That's the only advantage we have, and it expires the second you go in without using it. The 2 men behind them said nothing. Adrian said nothing. Dante looked at her with an expression she'd never seen on his face before. Not the earthquake under the surface, not the controlled professional blank, but something naked and unnavigable, the face of a man who has run out of positions that feel safe. If something goes wrong in there, he said, I know what to do. That's not what I was going to say. She waited. He said nothing else for a moment, then, 10 minutes. I'll have Caruso monitoring frequency. The word is cardinal. You say it or I hear it over comms, everything stops and we pull out. Understood. He held her gaze for one more second. Then he stepped forward and put one hand against the side of her face, just for a moment, just the warmth of his palm against her cold skin. And then he stepped back and became operational again, the private thing gone under. She turned toward the building. She moved. Usamt. The ventilation aperture was 8 feet off the ground, and she needed 3 attempts to reach it, her boots finding uncertain purchase on corroded metal, her arms doing the ugly functional work of pulling her own body weight without grace or elegance, just necessity. Her palms were scraped raw by the time she was through. She registered the pain as information and kept moving. Inside the building was a different quality of darkness than outside, warmer, the generator's heat pushing the temperature above freezing, the smell of rust and old oil and something chemical underneath. She was in a narrow maintenance corridor above the main floor, a catwalk structure that ran along the interior wall, and she could hear voices below. She moved along the catwalk slowly. The metal was old and complained under her weight, and she moved in increments, placing each foot with consideration, breathing through her nose, keeping her body close to the wall. Below her, through the gaps in the catwalk grating, she could see the main floor of the warehouse in fragments. A slice of lit space, portable work lights on stands, men in configurations she was trying to map. 4 visible from this angle, others probably beyond her sight line. Vincenzo himself she couldn't see yet. The east side. Adrian had said east side. She followed the catwalk toward the eastern end of the structure. The voices below grew quieter as she moved away from the main congregation. A different kind of quiet ahead, the particular silence of a space being used for containment rather than activity. A door set into the interior eastern wall. Below her, accessed from the main floor by a metal staircase she couldn't use without being visible. She studied the problem, looked at the catwalk's relationship to the door, looked at the drop. 12 feet. Concrete floor. She could break an ankle. She could also not. She went over the edge and dropped. The landing sent shock through both legs, and she buckled forward and caught herself on one knee and one hand and stayed there for 3 seconds, listening to the percussion of her own pulse and the voices from the main floor and the particular silence on the other side of the door. Nobody had heard, or nobody was moving if they had. She stood, tried the door, unlocked. Inside was a small office space, stripped of everything except a metal chair in the center, bolted to nothing but heavy enough that moving it was a project. The man in the chair had his hands secured behind him with zip ties, and his head was down, and he was breathing in the labored way of someone who had been in a stressful physical position for hours. She said his name, quietly. Once. Her father raised his head. In the 6 years she had been building her life in Manhattan, she had cultivated, deliberately and with considerable effort, a complicated peace with who her father was. A man who had failed her in specific ways and been present in others, who had never been the father she needed and had been, intermittently, the father he was capable of being. She had made a kind of tolerance out of that, had decided it was enough, had brought Noah to his apartment for birthdays and let Noah call him Grandpa, and told herself this was what adult relationships with imperfect parents looked like. What she saw in his face now was not the face of the imperfect father she had made her peace with. It was the face of a man who knew exactly what he had done. She did not have time for what that meant. She crouched behind him and worked at the zip ties. Her hands were not steady. She made them steady through an act of will that cost her something she could feel. "Lena," he started. "Don't," she said. "I need you to—" "Not now." The zip tie was cheap, and she found the weak point and worked it with her thumbnail and the edge of a key she'd put in her pocket back at the safe house for exactly this kind of eventuality. "We're getting out. When I say move, you move. You follow me and you stay low and you don't stop no matter what you hear. Do you understand?" "Yes." The tie gave. He brought his hands forward and gasped at the return of circulation, and she pulled him to his feet and he was unsteady. She put her shoulder under his arm and took some of his weight and hated herself for the reflexive care of it, the automatic physical grace of a daughter who had learned early how to help a man who needed help standing up. She checked her watch. 6 minutes since she'd left Dante. 4 minutes. She got her father to the door. She looked through the gap. The main floor was the same configuration she'd seen from the catwalk. She was at the wrong end of the building now, the eastern side, which was actually to her advantage because the main entrance and Vincenzo's position were at the west end. Between her and the exit, a long corridor of shadow along the interior wall, broken by pools of light from the work lamps on the main floor. "Stay behind me," she said. "Right behind me." She went. They moved along the wall, in the shadow, her father's breathing too loud and nothing she could do about it. She counted the pools of light they needed to cross. 3, spaced out, each one a moment of exposure, and moved from shadow to shadow, with her father pressed close, and her heart doing something loud and structural against her ribs. The first pool of light, cross. Made it, second pool. She paused. One of the men on the main floor had shifted position and was now oriented more toward the wall. She waited. He moved again. She went. Third pool. Halfway across, her father's foot caught something. A scrap of metal, an uneven seam in the floor, something she hadn't seen, and the sound it made in the silence of the eastern corridor was small, but entirely specific. The sound of a human foot encountering something accidentally. The sound of someone moving who was trying not to be heard. The man on the main floor turned. She pulled her father into the shadow and went absolutely still and stopped breathing. The man looked at the wall, looked at the corridor. She was 15 feet from him, in darkness, with her father's arm in her hand and her back against cold metal, and her lungs performing the extraordinary discipline of simply not operating. The man looked for 5 seconds. Then he turned back. She breathed. 10 feet to the exit. She could see the door, a side exit at the eastern end, a bar handle, the faint seam of outside air. She could feel it. She moved the last 10 feet in a slow, continuous, controlled motion. Her father matched to her rhythm, and she hit the bar handle with both hands and pushed, and the door opened and the cold came in and she got her father through and pulled it shut behind them with both hands so it didn't slam. Outside, the harbor wind, the dark. She was shaking. She hadn't realized it until right now, outside, with the cold touching her face and her father standing next to her with his hands hanging at his sides and his face doing something she refused to look at. Her watch said 9 minutes and 40 seconds, 20 seconds. She keyed the comm. "We're out. East side." Dante's voice came back immediately, tight, controlled, already moving. "Copy. We're going in." And then, from inside the building, the sound that meant the plan had started and could not be stopped. Not an explosion, not gunfire, something more contained and more final than either of those. The specific sound of a door coming off its hinges under the application of determined force, and then voices. And then the secondary sound of every contingency inside that building activating at once. She put her hand flat on her father's chest. "Don't move from this spot," she said. He looked at her. His face was doing the thing she'd refused to look at, and she looked at it now, briefly, and found in it the specific composite expression of a man who has watched the consequences of his choices arrive in physical form and has no remaining argument against them. "I'm sorry," he said. She held his gaze for 1 second. "I know," she said. And she meant it, and it didn't change anything, and both of those things were true at the same time. Then she turned back toward the building, because Dante had 10 minutes worth of plan, and she had heard, in the 30 seconds since the door had come down, a pattern of sound that didn't match what 10 minutes of plan was supposed to produce. Too much, too fast, from the wrong directions. The sound of something going sideways in the specific way that careful plans go sideways when the other side has been more prepared than you accounted for. She went back in through the side door. The interior had transformed. The work lights were still up, but the geometry of the space had changed. Men moving, positions shifted. The clean tactical picture she'd mapped from the catwalk, now complicated by variables that hadn't been there. She pressed into the shadow along the eastern wall and moved west, toward the sounds, toward the center of whatever was happening in the main floor. What she found, when she reached the sightline, was Dante. He was in the center of the warehouse floor in the pool of the work lights with 2 of his men. Not the 4 he'd come in with, 2, the arithmetic of that immediately and badly informative, and across from him, 30 feet away, stood Vincenzo Rivas in person. Vincenzo in person was different from Vincenzo in a 4-second video. He was not large. He was a medium-sized man in his 50s with silver hair and the particular posture of someone who had won enough confrontations that his body had stopped performing the anxiety of confrontation. He stood with his hands loose at his sides and 3 men flanking him, and he was looking at Dante with the patient, pleasant expression she recognized from the video. The expression that had chilled her then, and chilled her more now because she understood it better. He was winning. Not the fight. The fight hadn't started yet. Was suspended in the specific voltage of the moment before physical confrontation, both sides calculating. He was winning the thing before the fight. The positioning, the information. Whatever his people had done in the time between Adrian's release and now had cost Dante 2 of his men and the tactical advantage, and Vincenzo's posture said he knew it. "You came," Vincenzo said. His voice was exactly as she remembered it from the phone. Smooth, pleasantly precise. "I was starting to wonder if the bait wasn't—" "Where's Adrian?" Dante said. "Safe. I'm not a monster." Vincenzo said it the way people say things they mean in a specific, limited technical sense. "I wanted a conversation, Dante. I've wanted one for several months. You've been difficult to have a direct conversation with. We're having one now." "We are." Vincenzo moved 1 step forward. The 3 men with him moved fractionally. "I want you to understand that what I'm proposing isn't hostile, not fundamentally. What I'm proposing is a recognition of reality. You inherited something that was built for a different era by a different kind of man. Your father was effective for his time. His time passed before he did, and he didn't have the flexibility to recognize it." He tilted his head slightly. "You have flexibility. I've always thought that about you. You were never your father." "Stop talking," Dante said. "I'm making you an offer. You took my man. You threatened my—" He stopped. The word hung there. Family. She could hear its shape in the space where he stopped. And she watched Vincenzo watch him stop. Watched Vincenzo file the hesitation with visible satisfaction. "Your family," Vincenzo said pleasantly. "Yes, That's what I wanted to discuss. She was 30 feet behind Vincenzo and to his left. He didn't know she was there. His three men were oriented forward toward Dante. The two men still with Dante were focused on the men in front of them. The work lights created a sharp geometry of light and shadow, and she was entirely in the shadow, and no one had looked left in the last 45 seconds. She looked at Dante. He was looking at Vincenzo. But for one fraction of a second so small it could have been coincidence, could have been a random eye movement, could have been anything, his gaze cut left, to the shadow where she was standing, and cut back. He knew she was there. She reached into her jacket pocket and closed her hand around the only thing in it, the key she'd used on the zip ties, which was not a weapon, which was entirely useless, which was the sum total of what she'd brought into a building full of armed men because the plan had been to get her father out and be clear before any of this started. Vincenzo was still talking. Something about the organization, about transition, about the reasonable allocation of authority between men who understood what the current moment required. His voice had the texture of a man who had rehearsed this speech many times and found it satisfying to finally deliver it. Dante was listening, or performing listening. His body had the qualities she'd noticed at the coffee shop. The absence of distraction, everything stripped away, and she understood that he was performing patience the way she'd performed stillness against the interior wall, using it as a form of action. He was waiting for something. She looked at the men flanking Vincenzo, looked at the geometry of the space, looked at the work lights on their stands, tall and portable and placed without particular thought for defensive utility, placed for illumination only. She looked at the one directly to her left. The stand was a standard tripod configuration, the light mounted at the top, the whole thing about 5 feet tall and not bolted to anything. She looked at Dante. He was looking at Vincenzo. She moved to the light stand. Slow, controlled. 2 seconds of movement in complete silence, the cold concrete under her feet, the sounds of Vincenzo's monologue covering any small noise she made. She put both hands on the stand. She looked at the back of Vincenzo's head. She looked at Dante's face, waiting for the fraction of a second when his eyes would cut left again, when he would tell her without telling her that whatever he was waiting for was about to happen, that the window was about to open, that the moment between one configuration and the next was... Dante's eyes cut left. She pulled the stand. The work light went over with the specific violence of something heavy falling in a confined space. Not an explosion, not gunfire, but the immediate obliterating crash of metal and shattering bulb and the sudden subtraction of a third of the available light in the warehouse. The shadow that rushed in to fill the space where the light had been was instantaneous and total. And in the half-second of disorientation that followed, the half-second where every person in the room processed the crash and recalibrated and tried to locate the source, Dante moved. She had never seen him move like that. She had known, abstractly, what he was and what that meant. She had never seen the abstract become physical. He covered the distance to the nearest of Vincenzo's men in 3 strides, and the confrontation was brief and functional, and not something she looked away from, because she had decided somewhere in the last 12 hours that looking away was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. The second of Dante's men engaged simultaneously with Vincenzo's right flank. The third of Vincenzo's men turned toward the fallen light, toward her, and she was already moving, not toward him, away, back into the deep shadow of the eastern wall, drawing him away from the center of the room, making him chase a presence he couldn't fully locate. He was bigger than her. He was armed, and she was holding a key. She understood the arithmetic. She ran it differently. She let him follow her into the dark, and then she stopped and let him close the distance, and when he was near enough, she dropped low and drove her shoulder into his midsection the way she'd seen it done once, and prayed the physics were consistent with memory. They were close enough. He went back and hit the wall, and the impact knocked the orientation out of him for the 2 seconds she needed to get past him and back into the main floor. Her shoulder would hurt tomorrow. She noted this and moved on. The main floor had rearranged itself. One of Vincenzo's men was down. The other 2 were still engaged with Dante's people. The fight compressed into close, ugly work in the middle of the lit space. And Vincenzo himself. Vincenzo had done what she understood now was his essential nature, the nature of the patient man, the man who waited. He had stepped back from the chaos and was moving, not toward the exit, but toward the eastern corridor, toward the room where her father had been held, toward something she hadn't anticipated and now needed to. He knew her father was gone. He'd known it the moment his man found the empty room. She could see it in his movement, not flight, adjustment. He was recalculating, the way a good chess player recalculates when a piece disappears, looking for the next leverage point. She was the next leverage point. He hadn't seen her yet. He would. She made the decision in the time it takes to take a breath. She went after him. The eastern corridor was dim, one remaining work light at the far end throwing long shadows. Vincenzo was 20 feet ahead, moving with the economy of someone who knew the space. She was faster than he expected because he didn't know she was there yet, and she closed the distance to 10 feet before he registered the footfall behind him and turned. He looked at her. She looked at him. In person, he was exactly what his voice had promised. The pleasant face, the patient eyes, the complete absence of visible alarm at finding a woman he hadn't accounted for standing 10 feet away. He took her in with a single assessment, and she could see him filing her, categorizing her, deciding what she was. "You're the waitress," he said. "I'm the mother," she said. Something shifted fractionally in his pleasant expression. "You came back inside." It wasn't quite admiration. It was the acknowledgement of an unexpected variable, the adjustment a craftsman makes when the material behaves differently than the calculation predicted. "My father," she said. "You were going to use him again. He was useful the first time." Vincenzo tilted his head slightly. The corridor was narrow, 10 feet separating them, the wall on her left and open space on her right where the corridor met the main floor. "He came to us voluntarily, the first time. I want you to understand that. Nobody approached your father. He approached Enzo Morelli looking for a way out of a hole he'd dug himself, and Enzo gave him one." A pause. "People are capable of more betrayal than you want to believe. That's not a cruel observation. It's just true." "I know it's true," she said. "I've had a long night." He studied her. "What exactly is your plan here?" "I'm keeping you in this corridor until Dante is finished in the main room." "That's optimistic." "I'm a realistic person," she said, "but I've been surprised before." He moved. Not toward her. Sideways toward the opening where the corridor met the main floor, trying to get the open space on his side rather than hers. She moved to cut him off, and he changed direction and she changed with him. And for a moment they were doing something that was almost absurd. Two people in an industrial corridor, no weapons visible, circling with the careful attention of people who were both thinking faster than they were moving. Then Vincenzo stopped circling and looked at something past her shoulder. She didn't take her eyes off him. She had learned that one the hard way, in the general curriculum of the last 24 hours. "It's over," Dante said from behind her. She felt the shift in the corridor's atmosphere before she heard his footsteps, that change in quality that a space undergoes when someone with a certain kind of authority enters it. She stepped to the side, enough to have both men in her sightline without turning her back on either. Dante was cut above his left eye. His shirt was dark at the side where it shouldn't have been dark. He was holding himself in the specific way of someone who has decided not to perform their pain but hasn't fully succeeded, the body's compensation visible in the angle of his shoulders and the set of his jaw. He was looking at Vincenzo. Vincenzo looked back at him with the assessment of a man reviewing an outcome he'd considered possible and finding it neither surprising nor catastrophic. "Your men," Dante said. "I assumed," Vincenzo said. "Adrian is alive." "I know, I told you I'm not a monster." Vincenzo put his hands into his jacket pockets, a deliberate gesture of non-aggression that was also, she understood, a kind of performance. The performance of a man who loses gracefully because he has decided that how you lose is also information about who you are. "So, here we are." "Here we are," Dante said. "You understand that removing me doesn't remove the problem. The men who are with me were with me, right? They don't disappear. You'll spend the next 2 years managing the fallout." "I know. And the child, once this is known," "He's already known," Dante said. "I made that decision tonight, before we came in." He said it evenly, without drama, as though he were reporting a fact rather than describing the dismantling of a carefully maintained secret. Every captain on my council received the same message at 9:15 tonight. His name, his age, his mother, documented and verified. The leverage you were holding doesn't exist anymore. Something moved in Vincenzo's expression. For the first time since she'd seen him, on the video, in the corridor, in the main floor, the pleasant patience cracked slightly, the surface shifting to reveal the calculation running underneath it, rapidly reassessing. That was a significant risk, Vincenzo said. Yes. Some of them will see it as weakness. Some of them will. The ones who matter won't. Dante moved forward, one step, into the precise zone of proximity that changed what a situation was. I need your phones, all of them, and the name of every man in your network, every account, every arrangement. I need it complete, and I need it tonight. Vincenzo looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Lena. Then he looked at the space between them. The waitress came back inside, he said, seemingly to himself. He pulled one hand out of his pocket and reached into his jacket. The phone he produced was expensive, dark-cased, and he held it out toward Dante not as a surrender but as a transaction. The strongest thing in your organization, he said, might be standing next to you. Dante took the phone. Vincenzo looked at Lena one final time. The pleasant expression had resolved into something simpler. Just a man, tired, recognizing the shape of what had happened. You're going to have a complicated life, he said. I've had one for a while, she said. I'm used to it. Two of Dante's men came into the corridor behind them, and Vincenzo went with them without resistance, with the dignity of a man who understood that the performance continued even now, that the manner of his exit was also a statement. She watched him go. She let out a long, slow breath and felt the cold of the corridor in her lungs and her shoulder that had hit the wall, which was informing her now with considerable clarity that tomorrow was going to be a problem. Dante had not moved. He was still holding the phone, standing in the corridor, and when she turned back to him, she found him looking at her with an expression she didn't immediately have a category for. Not relief, not the aftermath of adrenaline, but something quieter and more specific. You went back inside, he said. You were outnumbered. I had a plan. Your plan was losing, she said. I could hear it from outside. Something that was almost a smile crossed his face. Almost. His side was still dark at the shirt. You need to look at that, she said. I know. Now, she said. Not in an hour. Now. He looked at her for one more moment. Then he nodded. They went out into the cold together. Her father was where she'd left him. He was sitting on the ground with his back against the building's exterior wall, his knees drawn up, his hands between his knees. He had the look of a man who had been sitting in one position long enough that getting up was going to require a separate decision. When she came around the corner of the building and he saw her, he didn't try to stand. He just looked at her with the face she'd seen in the video. The face of a man who understood what he'd done and had no remaining argument against the weight of it. She stood in front of him. The harbor wind moved between them. She had run through this conversation in pieces during the hour since she'd found that document, run through the versions of it that involved shouting, the versions that involved a coldness so complete it would have constituted its own kind of violence, the versions where she said all the specific and devastating things she was capable of saying when she was genuinely hurt. She had all of those versions ready. She looked at her father's face. She said, Noah's going to want to know why he didn't see you for a while. Her father's eyes closed briefly. When they opened, they were wet. He didn't try to hide it. What will you tell him? I don't know yet. She crouched down in front of him, which put them at the same level, which was not something she'd planned but which felt necessary. I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it clearly. She waited until he was looking directly at her. What you did, I'm not going to tell you it's forgivable. I don't know if it's forgivable. I don't know what that even means right now, tonight. When I'm sitting outside a building I just walked back into because of the chain of events your choices helped set in motion. She paused. But you're my father, and Noah calls you Grandpa. And I'm not capable tonight of deciding that those things mean nothing. He was quiet for a moment. I thought I was protecting you, he said. At the time, when I went to Enzo Morelli, I told myself that Dante was dangerous, that you were in something you didn't understand, that getting you away from it was... Don't. Her voice was flat. Don't build the story that makes it bearable. Not tonight. You were in debt and you made a trade and you told yourself what you needed to tell yourself. I know what it looks like. I've had a long time to understand what it looks like when people do things for money and call it something else. She stood. Get up. He got up. Slowly, the way she'd helped him up inside, the compensation in his body from hours in the chair. She did not help him this time. She waited while he found his feet. You're going to have to be accountable, she said, to Dante, to the people who were affected. I don't know exactly what that looks like. That's not my determination to make. But you're going to have to do it, and I'm not going to protect you from it. I know. And then, she said, we're going to have to figure out what comes after that, you and me, Noah. She looked at him. I'm not doing that tonight. I'm not doing it this week. But I'm not closing the door either. That's all I can offer you right now. Her father looked at her for a long moment. He had the particular look of a man who had expected less, who had built himself toward the impact of a complete severance and found something more complicated and harder to hold than simple ending. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. Felix appeared at the corner of the building with a car, and she put her father in it, and she stood in the harbor wind for a moment alone before she went back to find Dante. They left Red Hook at 2 a.m. Dante's side was 2 cracked ribs and a laceration that Adrian, whose medical knowledge appeared to be one of his more useful qualities, addressed in the back of a car with a field kit and the focused efficiency of someone who had done it before. Dante sat through the procedure with the expression of a man who was refusing to engage with what was happening to his body on any level that would interfere with thinking. She sat across from him in the car and watched Adrian work and said nothing, and Dante looked at her between the moments of the procedure that required his attention, and what moved between them in the silence of the car was not the thing she'd been carrying for 5 years, not the grief and the rage and the complicated archaeology of what they'd had and lost. It was something new, something that had been built in the last 24 hours out of materials that were not romantic and not gentle, but were real in the way that things forged under extreme conditions are real. She didn't have a name for it yet. She didn't need one tonight. They went back to Greenpoint. Noah was asleep. Felix had apparently maintained the card game long enough to achieve his capitulation, the cards still arranged on the blanket in some final configuration, Noah's hand still loosely holding 3 of them. He was deeply, completely under, the sleep of a child who had been kept safe and knew it even in sleep, even without knowing the specifics of what safe had cost. She stood in the doorway of his room for a long time. Then she went to the main room where Dante was sitting on the couch, with his shirt partially buttoned over the bandaging Adrian had applied, looking at the wall opposite with the blank focus of a man whose adrenaline had finally finished metabolizing. She sat down next to him, not touching, just proximate. He's asleep, she said. Good. The apartment was quiet. Outside, the city was doing what the city did. It never went fully silent. There was always the distant register of traffic, a siren somewhere, the structure of 8 million lives continuing regardless. She had always found that oddly comforting, the city's indifference, its refusal to pause for any individual situation. Tell me what comes next, she said. The actual next. Not the plans, not the strategy. Just what the next few weeks look like. Dante was quiet for a moment, organizing. Vincenzo's network gets mapped and dismantled. That takes time, weeks, probably longer. Some of it is financial, some of it is personnel. The captains who were on the fence, most of them came in once I sent the message tonight about Noah. He stopped. That was the right move. I should have thought of it myself. You were thinking about protecting us, she said. You weren't wrong to think about that. I was late. You were also the one who walked into a building with 10 of Vincenzo's men in it, she said. So, something shifted in his face, the almost smile again. Sal Greco, he said. I have to deal with Sal. Carefully. He's known too much for too long, and I have to understand the full scope of what he passed before I can. He stopped himself. You don't need the details of that. I told you I wanted to be informed. You told me that, he agreed. And I'm informing you that some of what needs to happen in the next few weeks is not something I want you informed about. Not because I'm managing you, because there's a version of this where you know less and that's genuinely better for you. He looked at her. I'm asking you to let me draw that line, not unilaterally, I'm asking. She considered this. Okay, she said, but you draw it out loud. You tell me when you're drawing it and why. You don't just go quiet. Agreed. And Noah, she said, we have to talk about Noah. The room shifted slightly around that sentence. Not physically, just the quality of the air in it. I know, Dante said. Not tonight. I mean, it's not a tonight conversation. But soon. I need you to understand that whatever happens with us, whatever this is, she gestured vaguely at the space between them. That's separate from what Noah needs. Those are two different conversations, and I need them to stay two different conversations. I understand. He doesn't know who you are. He knows you're important to me in some way he can't categorize yet. He's going to ask. She looked at her hands. He's going to ask me, and I'm going to have to answer him, and I need to do that in my own time, in my own way, and I need you to not be ahead of me on it. I won't be, Dante said. He's yours first. You said that the first night. I understood it then. She looked at him. He looked back at her, and what was in his face was not the careful professional control she'd observed for most of the last 24 hours, and not the cracked open thing underneath it, but something that had resolved past both of those into a simpler register. A man who had spent 5 years carrying the weight of a choice he'd made in 45 seconds, and was now sitting in a room with the person that choice had cost most, and trying to be exactly what he was, nothing augmented, nothing hidden. I didn't stop, he said. For 5 years. I told myself I did. I told myself it was cleaner if I let it be over, if I let you build something that didn't have my shadow in it. He paused. I was wrong about that. Yes, she said, you were. I can't fix it. No. But I'd like to. He stopped, looked for the right words with unusual care. I'd like to earn the right to try. That's all I'm asking. Not forgiveness on a timeline, not promises, just the possibility of trying. She sat with that. The city moved outside. The night pressed against the windows. She thought about 5 years of building something out of nothing. She thought about Noah's face this morning in the doorway, watching her pack, and the thing he'd said about how Dante had looked at him. Like when you find something you thought was gone and it comes back. She thought about what she'd felt when she'd heard Dante's name said in her own voice for the first time in 5 years, standing in Carmine's with a water pitcher in her hand, and the complicated, terrible accuracy of it, that it had felt, despite everything, like something snapping back into alignment. She thought about this fact that she had walked back into that building tonight, not because anyone had made her, not because the plan required it, but because she'd heard something going wrong and her body had decided before her mind could argue. Ask me again, she said, in a few months, when things are different. Dante looked at her. Ask me again, she said, and I'll give you an actual answer. The almost smile completed itself, briefly, just long enough to be real. Okay, he said. She leaned her head back against the couch cushion and looked at the ceiling and let the exhaustion come in now that the adrenaline had finished, the full weight of what the last 24 hours had been pressing down through every layer she'd been holding up against it. She was asleep within a few minutes. She didn't fully realize it was happening, which was its own kind of relief. The body making its own decision, bypassing the mind's preference to keep processing, just shutting down because it was done. She didn't hear Dante get up. She didn't hear him move to the chair across the room, where he sat for most of what remained of the night. She didn't see him watching the door to Noah's room with that expression. The earthquake resolved, finally, into something quieter and more enduring than seismic movement. She just slept in a borrowed room in Greenpoint, while the city continued outside and her son breathed in the next room and the harbor reflected the last of the winter dark before the morning came. Spring arrived late that year, the way it sometimes did in New York. Tentatively, then all at once, the cold giving ground grudgingly, until one morning in early April it simply stopped arguing. The restaurant on the Hudson was not large. That had been deliberate. Lena had looked at spaces for 3 months before she found the right one. A converted ground floor unit in a building on the West Side waterfront, 12 tables, a kitchen that was functional rather than impressive, windows that ran the full length of the south wall and gave the room the kind of light that changed through the day and made people look like the best version of themselves in the late afternoon. She had signed the lease herself. She had negotiated the build-out herself. She had hired 3 people who had all done more difficult things than open a restaurant and understood what that meant. She had not asked Dante for money. He had offered twice. She had declined twice, and on the second declination he had understood it fully and not offered again. He had, at her request, helped with the security consultation. The building had a system now that she understood completely and had tested herself, and that understanding had cost her nothing except time. Noah's 7th birthday was in April. They had it at the restaurant, on a Sunday afternoon when the place was closed to the public. A small gathering, 8 children and their parents. The organized chaos of a birthday that involved a table covered in fish-shaped decorations because Noah's current obsession was deep-sea creatures, and he had opinions about the specificity of the theme. He wore a plastic shark fin on his head for most of the afternoon, and explained to every adult present, at length, the difference between bioluminescence and iridescence. She watched him from across the room and felt the particular quality of love that had always been the central fact of her life. Not the love she'd had for Dante, not the love she carried for her own complicated history, but the specific gravity of a mother's love for a child who had been, from the moment she understood he existed, the reason the reconstruction of herself was worth doing. Dante was there. He sat in the corner by the windows and ate birthday cake and watched Noah explain deep-sea biology to a 7-year-old who was clearly overwhelmed, and his face had the look she'd come to know over the 3 months since Red Hook. The look of a man who had accepted the terms he'd been given and was finding, against perhaps his own expectation, that they were enough. It was not a simple situation. She had not let it become a simple situation, because simple was not what it was. He was in Noah's life in the way she had decided on, present, consistent, and honest in the specific way she had instructed, which was that Noah knew Dante was someone important from before, someone who was going to be around, without the full weight of the specific biology of it landing on a 7-year-old who was still figuring out the difference between bioluminescence and iridescence. Noah had, in the 3 months, formed his own opinion of Dante independent of any information she'd provided. He had decided, with the frank, pragmatic assessment of a child who judged people by their actions rather than their categories, that Dante was useful. He answered questions directly. He didn't talk down. And he had once procured, through means Noah didn't investigate, an extremely specific book about anglerfish that Noah had mentioned wanting once and forgotten about, and which had appeared on his desk one morning like it had always been there. She had seen Noah look at Dante sometimes the way she'd seen Dante look at Noah. The same calibration, the same quiet recognition of something that couldn't quite be named yet but had weight. She let that be what it was. Her father had been to the restaurant twice. The first time was awkward in the specific way of things that have been broken and repaired, visible at the seams, functional but different. They had eaten together and talked about Noah's birthday, and not talked about the things that would take longer than 2 months to navigate, and she had driven him to the subway and watched him go and felt the complicated texture of love for someone you cannot entirely forgive but cannot entirely release. The second time he had arrived with a card for Noah's birthday, homemade. He had always made Noah's birthday cards himself, had always been good at that specific thing, the small, tender gestures that existed alongside and did not explain away the larger failures. Noah had been delighted by the card. She had watched her father watch Noah's delight and had seen, in his face, the particular pain of a man who understood precisely what he'd risked for the sake of his own survival. She had not told Noah about the document. She had not told him about his grandfather's choices. That was a conversation for a later version of both of them. On the evening of Noah's birthday, after the other children had gone home and the decorations had been partially disassembled, and Noah had fallen asleep in the back booth, with his head on his folded arms and a small stuffed anglerfish clutched in one hand, she stood at the window looking at the Hudson. The light on the water in April was different from February light, less absolute, more patient somehow, the kind of light that was still working out who it was going to be. Dante came to stand beside her. They stood in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that has been earned, that has been built out of uncomfortable silence and necessary conversation, and the slow accumulation of being in the same room repeatedly without either person performing a version of themselves, and watch the water. "Tell me something," she said. "What?" "Tell me something true. Something you haven't said yet." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the light on the water. "I used to drive past Carmine's," he said, "after I left. Not often. Twice, maybe 3 times over the years. I told myself I was in the neighborhood. I never went in." He paused. "The last time was about 18 months ago. There was a snowstorm." She looked at him. "I sat in the car for 20 minutes, he said. "Then I left." His jaw moved slightly. "I should have gone in." "Yes," she said. "You should have." "I know." The water moved below them. Noah breathed in the booth behind them, the deep unconscious rhythm of a child who trusted the world he'd been given. The restaurant held the end of the day in its walls, the smell of birthday cake and coffee, and the particular warmth of a room that had been full of children. "Ask me," she said. He turned to look at her. In the April light he looked, not younger, not older, but more exactly himself, the years sitting on him in a way that had resolved into something she recognized and trusted. "Is it time?" he said. "Ask me," she said again. He turned to face her fully. He looked at her the way he had in the corridor of the shipping terminal, in the coffee shop, across the table in 100 small moments over 3 months that had been building toward this particular quality of attention. Everything stripped away. No performance, no management, just him. "Give me the chance," he said. "Not what we had before. Something new. Whatever you decide it should be. Whatever pace you set. Whatever it looks like when we build it from here." His voice was quiet and entirely direct. "I'm asking for the possibility. That's all. Just tell me the door isn't closed." She looked at him. She looked at the water. She looked at Noah sleeping in the booth with the anglerfish. "The door isn't closed," she said. He let out a breath. It was a small thing, almost imperceptible, but she had learned to read the small things in him, had spent 3 months in the practice of that reading, and she understood it for what it was. Not relief exactly, but the release of something held for a very long time. She reached out and put her hand over his, where it rested on the windowsill. He turned his hand and held hers, carefully, like something he didn't want to break. Outside, the Hudson moved in the last of the April light, patient and ongoing, doing what rivers do, carrying everything forward, not caring about the weight of it, just moving. The city glowed at the edges of the water. The evening came in slowly, the way evenings do in spring, taking its time. And in a restaurant on the west side waterfront, a woman stood at a window holding the hand of a man who had made a terrible choice and spent 5 years measuring its cost, and their son slept in the booth behind them with a small stuffed anglerfish and no knowledge yet of how much had been risked and paid and survived to bring all 3 of them to this particular moment in this particular light. The story did not end with answers. It ended with a door left open, a hand held carefully, a child breathing in a room full of people who had chosen, finally and without conditions, to stay. That was enough. For now, that was exactly enough.